Did you know that you can tell a lot about someone by their tongue? If it's unduly white, it can be a sign of thrush infection. An overly large tongue can be a sign of an underactive thyroid gland. In this lesson, we're going to consider the first 12 verses of chapter 3, and the lesson we will learn is that you can learn a lot about a person by what they say. The tongue, people's words, is a theme that James speaks about in every chapter of his letter, and this should highlight to us how important a subject our words are. It has been said that we should watch your tongue. It's in a wet place where it's easy to slip. The first 2 verses give a warning to us not to unduly want to be teachers. James was writing to a largely Jewish audience, and they naturally saw themselves as teachers. After all, God had chosen them to represent him to the world, Romans 2:17-21. But we should be careful not to crave this role. That is not to discourage those whom God has gifted to exercise their gift. However, the flesh in me longs to be the centre of attention, all eyes and ears on me. Now in chapter 1, James has already said that we need to be doers of the word and not hearers only. And in 1 Peter 3 in verse 1, the encouragement is given that an unbelieving husband may be won by the wordless actions of their wife. I'm deeply thankful for those gifted teachers who have helped me understand what the Bible teaches. However, I have to say that I've probably learnt more by observing individuals living out his word as a reality in their own lives. In verses 3-8 we get 5 pictures of what the tongue is like, and each gives us a slightly different lesson. First, the tongue is like a horse's bit and bridle. Whoever controls that controls the will of the horse. The direction and speed of the animal is governed by the bit, that small piece of metal that is in the horse's mouth. That raises the question as to who do I want controlling my tongue? It ought to be the Holy Spirit, using it for good, rather than my sinful fleshly nature causing untold damage. Each day needs to start by handing him the reins of my tongue, so that my whole being is controlled for good. Second, a ship's rudder is used as an example. The Titanic was over 850 foot long, and yet the rudder was only 15 feet at its widest point. The direction of such a huge vessel was controlled by such a small part of the ship. Our tongues are relatively small, and for the most part, out of sight. However, they have a disproportionately large effect upon our lives. How often have I made an idle boast and then found myself trying to live up to that? Just because our tongue is small, we should not underestimate the power for good or bad that it might have. The third picture James uses is that of a great fire. The thought here is of the unpredictable outcome from such a small beginning. A tiny spark can lead to a wildfire that devastates huge swathes of countryside. In 1666, a small fire in Thomas Farriner's bakery on Pudding Lane was put out. 3 hours later, his house was engulfed in flames, and for 4 days the Great Fire of London burned, destroying over 13,000 homes and 87 churches. Who could have predicted that such a small spark could have had such far-reaching consequences for so many? It's all too easy for a careless word to have unintended consequences out of all proportion to what the speaker was thinking. Once spoken, like a spark, they can never be recalled. Proverbs 16:27 says, "A scoundrel plots evil, and his speech is like a scorching fire." There is a real link here between what we say and the character we have. The fourth picture relates to the taming of all sorts of wild animals. Mankind has, with patience, tamed lions, tigers, snakes, elephants, so many other kinds of creatures. We need to have similar patience in learning to tame our tongues. The final picture is like a snake, always on the move, coiled and ready to strike, full of deadly poison. Did you know that a typical bite from a black mamba contains 100 milligrams of toxin, sufficient to kill 14 people? How many people have my words' character assassinated? From all these pictures, James is giving a clear warning that the tongue, what we say, may be small but does have a tremendous capacity, often can be exceedingly dangerous. So, in verses 9 to 12, James presents two possible outcomes for our tongues, one for good and the other for bad. The tongue is like nothing else in nature. A fresh water spring can only produce fresh water. A fig tree can only produce figs. However, our tongues can produce both good and bad words, and that ought not to be. How ridiculous that one moment we're praising God and telling Him how much we love Him, and the next we're cursing those made in the image of God and speaking words of hatred. I don't think that these verses contain anything that is really difficult to understand, but I do think that they contain teaching that is really difficult to put into practice, so I want to take some time now to positively encourage the right use of the tongue. When I was young, we were brought up on the maxim that if you haven't got anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, which is true and important to follow, but a bit negative. You see, James does allow for the positive role the tongue can play. Our words can build up and be of benefit to others. A kind word spoken just at the right time has the enormous power to brighten a day. A ship's rudder can as easily make it run aground as it can help the ship avoid striking an iceberg. A spark can destroy a city, or it can light a fire to cook a meal. So, let us make 3 resolutions to enact from today and every day. Never criticise others, unless it is in a positive way. We can stop others from doing something in a wrong way by a kind word given from a gentle spirit. We can also destroy someone's confidence with a harsh word coming from a mean spirit. Never diminish others with our words. Clovis G. Chappell in his sermons from the Psalms said, "The mudslinger cannot engage in his favourite pastime without getting some of the mud upon his hands and upon his heart." How often we have come away from such an experience with a sense of defilement. We were vainly hoping that by slinging mud upon others, we might enhance someone's estimate of our own cleanliness. We were foolish enough to believe that we could build ourselves up by tearing another down. We were blind enough to imagine that by putting a stick of dynamite under the house of our neighbour, we could strengthen the foundations of our own. Gossip, lies, snide remarks and tale-bearing always diminish ourselves as well as those who are on the receiving end of our words. Never go a day without giving others praise. I belong to God, so there should not be a day that goes by when I don't offer Him praise for who He is and for what He's done. That's a good use of my tongue. He has made me a part of the church, so instead of criticising my fellow believers each day, I should think of something good I have to say about one of them and tell them so. He has given me a human family, so let me surprise them today with a kind word, an expression of why I'm glad they're part of my family, or a thank you for all that they do. Here are 3 ways we can harness the power of the tongue for good.